First story, the Arizona UFO encounter, 2003. It was late in the evening, and the Arizona desert was as quiet as it gets out here. I'd been camping alone for a couple of days, just trying to get away from everything. I remember sitting by the campfire, staring at the stars, feeling that weird peace that only the desert seems to offer. I don't know why, but that night felt different. Something was off. I could feel it in my gut, like the air had a different weight to it. But I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe it was the isolation messing with my head. I had no idea how much worse it was going to get. Around midnight, I heard this sound, low, deep, like a hum. I thought maybe it was just the wind, but then it started getting louder. It wasn't like anything natural, not like any animal or machine I'd ever heard. The sound felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And then I saw it. The lights in the sky weren't like anything I could explain. It wasn't a plane, I knew that for sure. It wasn't even a helicopter. These lights were moving too smoothly, too fast, and too precisely. At first, I thought I might be hallucinating. Maybe I was just exhausted from too much time out there by myself. But the lights kept coming closer. I felt this strange pull, like I couldn't look away, like something in me knew what was happening even before my brain could catch up. The next thing I knew, I wasn't on the ground anymore. I wasn't even in the desert. 1 second I was sitting by the fire, and the next I was somewhere else. It was like I'd been pulled through a thin veil of air, and everything around me looked wrong, distorted, out of focus. The ground under me felt solid, but I could see the stars behind it, as if they were part of the fabric of the place I'd been pulled into. I didn't know where I was. Hell, I didn't even know what was happening. There were figures around me, tall, humanoid shapes. I didn't see them approach. I don't even know how they got there. But they were there, standing over me. Their bodies were impossibly long, their skin almost metallic, a strange silver sheen that seemed to shimmer in the air. They didn't speak, but I felt them communicating with me, not through words, but through something else, a kind of awareness, a shared understanding. I can't explain it well, but it was like they knew everything about me. They knew my fears, my desires, my thoughts, and I felt them invade me, almost like they were reading my soul. There was no fear at first, just this strange sense of familiarity, like I wasn't really scared of them, but more like they were familiar in a way I couldn't put into words. I've never felt anything like it, and it made everything feel even weirder. I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't feel like I was in danger. Yet at the same time, I knew I should be terrified. I can't remember exactly how long I was standing there, or if I was standing at all. Time felt wrong, warped. It wasn't like the seconds or minutes I knew. It was like everything stretched and folded in on itself. These beings, they didn't speak, not with their mouths, but somehow they made me understand what was about to happen. They were going to examine me, and not just in the way a doctor might examine a patient. This was different. It felt invasive, like they were going to reach into me in ways no human ever could. I felt this pressure in my chest, like my heart was about to burst, but I couldn't move. It wasn't that I was paralyzed or trapped. It was more like my body wasn't mine anymore. I remember being lifted, but not by any physical hands. It was like I was being pulled, drawn upward, and I couldn't resist. I felt weightless, floating, and my body seemed to shift as I was moved. The next thing I remember, I was lying down. I don't know how I got there, but I was on some cold, metallic surface. The air was sterile, almost too clean. The walls around me were smooth, featureless, and the ceiling had this dull, soft glow to it, like a soft light that didn't cast shadows. I was inside a ship. I'm sure of it now. But at the time, it didn't feel like a ship. It didn't feel like anything I knew. There was no sound, no hum, no engine noise, just this eerie silence. The beings, or whatever they were around me again. I couldn't move my arms or legs, but I could feel them, their presence as they hovered over me. I didn't know if they were looking at me or not. It felt like they were watching, but not with their eyes. They didn't need to. The weirdest part was how they moved, fast but with no jerky motions. Everything they did was fluid, almost dreamlike, like they were gliding instead of walking. What happened next is still hard to explain. I was conscious, but it felt like I was watching myself from somewhere far away, like I wasn't really there in my own body. I felt detached, almost like my own skin wasn't mine. One of the beings reached down and placed its hand, if you could even call it a hand, on my chest. The skin was smooth, metallic, like liquid silver that shifted and shimmered with every movement. When it touched me, I felt a cold shock run through me. Not painful, but enough to make my heart race. Then images started flashing in my mind, strange alien landscapes, planets and cities, unlike anything I'd ever seen. There were beings, like us, but not quite. Their bodies were different. Some had multiple limbs, some had elongated heads, and others were so strange I couldn't even describe them. They were all intelligent, and I could feel that deep down, that understanding. It was like they were showing me that we weren't the only ones, we weren't the only intelligent life in the universe. It was terrifying, but at the same time, I don't know how to put it, I felt like I was being shown a truth that I wasn't ready for. The images kept coming, fast and overwhelming. I couldn't stop them. It was like a slideshow of civilizations, some more advanced than ours, others primitive but all alive. I saw stars and planets and moons orbiting distant suns. I saw ships, some massive, others tiny, traveling through space in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. Each image felt like a revelation, a truth too big to fully grasp, but somehow I was absorbing it all, understanding it, feeling it deep in my bones. And then, just as quickly as the visions began, they stopped. The pressure in my chest increased, a tightness that felt like I couldn't breathe, like my ribs were being crushed. It was like the ship itself was alive, responding to the tension in my body. I started to panic, the room spinning around me, my pulse racing out of control. The beings around me seemed to notice, and one of them stepped forward. I could feel its presence more than see it, but somehow it was like it was trying to comfort me, trying to calm my mind. It placed something on my head. It wasn't a helmet or anything, just a feeling, a light touch. And then the panic started to fade. My breathing slowed, my chest loosened, and I felt calmer than I had in a long time. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part came next when they started their examination. I can't explain how, but it was like I was being scanned. Like they were looking through every part of me, from the inside out. It wasn't painful, not in the way you'd think. It wasn't like a needle or a sharp instrument. It was like I was being studied in some way that was so invasive, I didn't even have the words for it. I felt them probing my thoughts, my memories. It was so intimate, so wrong, but it wasn't like they were hurting me. They were just exploring. Like they were picking through my life, understanding who I was, what I was. I could feel every emotion I had ever experienced, all my memories flashing before me, but they weren't just mine anymore. They were shared. It was like they were in my mind, reliving my experiences as if they were their own. And it wasn't just my mind. Every part of me felt like it was being opened up, laid bare for them to see. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't stop it. And somehow it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. I don't know how long this went on. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes or days. Time was a joke. The weird thing was, I wasn't alone anymore. At some point, I became aware of others around me. There were figures, humans, or what looked like humans, floating in the same strange, silent space as me. They didn't move, they didn't react, but I could sense them. Their fear, their confusion, their exhaustion. I could feel their presence in the same way I felt the beings around me. But they were different. They weren't like the others. They were broken. Some of them had expressions of terror on their faces. Others seemed lifeless, hollow. They didn't look at me. They didn't even acknowledge I was there. They were just there in the same place as me, caught in the same strange moment. And I couldn't understand it. Why were they there? What were they being shown? Why were they like this? I wanted to scream, to ask them what had happened, but I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was trapped, not physically, but mentally. My mind was spiraling, drowning in all these thoughts, these questions. And just when I thought I was going to lose my sanity, the beings around me seemed to notice. They were aware of me, of my distress. One of them reached out, and again I felt that cold touch, but this time it wasn't as soothing. It was sharp, invasive in a different way. They pulled something from me, something I couldn't see, but I could feel it being taken. A part of me. My thoughts, my essence. It felt like they were removing something important, something that made me, me. I wanted to fight it, to stop them, but I couldn't. My body wasn't mine anymore. They were inside me, controlling me, examining me in ways that were too far beyond what I could understand. And then, just like that, they let me go. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't slow. 1 second I was on that cold table, and the next I was back in the desert, the night sky above me. I was lying on the ground, gasping for air, covered in sweat. My heart was racing. I could barely breathe, and the world around me felt wrong, like it was too still, too silent. The air was too thick, too heavy, but I didn't know where I was, or when I was. I stood up, but my legs felt like jelly. I stumbled, not sure of my surroundings. The fire was still burning, but everything was off. It was like nothing had changed, but at the same time it had. The desert around me felt alien, like I wasn't supposed to be there. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. But it was like the experience was slipping away from me, fading faster than I could hold on to it. The memories were there, but they didn't feel like my own. It was like someone else's life that I had borrowed, and now I couldn't make sense of it. I tried to walk, tried to get my bearings, but it was like I was moving through a dream. Nothing was real, not in the way I knew things to be. My head was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with time itself. It felt like I'd been gone for hours, maybe days, but the stars in the sky didn't look any different. Nothing had changed. The moment I tried to make sense of it, my chest tightened again, that same cold pressure gripping me. I had to get out of there. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay. I grabbed my gear and started walking, toward where, I don't know. I didn't know what direction I was heading in. The world felt so distorted, like I was walking through a fog. My steps were slow, deliberate, but I felt like I wasn't really moving. My mind kept drifting back to those images, those beings, the way they looked at me. The way they seemed to know everything about me, as if they had access to every part of my being. I couldn't forget the other people I had seen in that place. Were they like me? Had they gone through the same thing? Were they still out there? My stomach churned at the thought, but no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Not physically, but I could feel it. The weight of something lurking just out of sight. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see one of those figures, one of them standing there watching me. But there was nothing. The desert was still. Too still. I don't know how long I walked, or how far. It felt like I was moving in circles. The landscape blurred around me, the desert stretching on endlessly. The stillness was suffocating. Every step I took felt heavier, like the ground was pulling me down, or like I was walking through wet sand. But when I looked down at my boots, the earth didn't look disturbed. I was walking on solid ground, but it felt like I was trudging through something thick, something wrong. The panic was starting to rise again. I couldn't breathe, couldn't focus. I needed to get away from here. I needed to get back to civilization, back to people who could tell me this was a nightmare, a hallucination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that none of that mattered. I couldn't make sense of what had happened. The ship, the beings, the visions, they were too real. And yet, I was standing here in the same desert with no explanation. My head felt like it was going to explode. Then, I heard something, a sound in the distance. At first it was too faint, too far to identify, but then it grew louder. A hum, the same hum from before. The same hum that had pulled me into their world. It was getting closer. My heart started racing again, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned around, my eyes scanning the dark horizon. But there was nothing there. The hum didn't stop. It only got louder, vibrating through the air. I could feel it in my chest now, in my bones. It was like the sound itself was alive, breathing with me. The fear gripped me like a vice, but I couldn't move. It was like the hum was calling to me, pulling me back, pulling me towards something I wasn't ready for. I could feel the ship, even if I couldn't see it. It was like it was hovering right above me, waiting. The air grew colder, and the silence around me became deafening. The desert had vanished. Everything around me felt wrong, like it had been distorted. I could feel it in my gut. Something was coming, and I couldn't stop it. My legs buckled beneath me, and I dropped to my knees, gasping for breath, my vision blurring. The hum was deafening now, and then, just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. I don't remember how I made it back to my truck. One minute I was on the ground, struggling to breathe, and the next I was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, eyes wide open. The truck was still running, the engine humming like it always did, but everything felt wrong. The world was off kilter, the air too thick. I started the engine and drove, not knowing where I was going, but I had to leave. I had to get away from there. The road was empty, the desert stretching out on both sides. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something. Anything. But there was nothing. Just the endless night. When I finally got to the nearest town, I don't remember feeling any relief. The people around me didn't seem real. Everything felt like a dream. I've tried to forget what happened. I've tried to tell myself it was just a bad experience, some weird thing I imagined. But every night, I still hear that hum. And sometimes, I wake up, drenched in sweat, with the taste of metal on my tongue. It's been years, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone in this world. I don't know where they are or what they want, but I can't escape the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting, and that one day they'll come back for me. I don't know why, I don't know how, but I know they will. Second story, The Desert's Silent Witness, Gobi Desert, Mongolia, 1983. It was around midnight when everything changed. I remember the air in the Gobi Desert was heavier than usual, like it had a strange, almost electric charge to it. The wind was absent, just a dead, quiet stillness that made me uneasy. I was a long way from the camp, too far maybe. But as an explorer, I thought it was just another quiet night in the middle of nowhere, nothing to worry about. The desert stretches endlessly, and I was used to the solitude, the silence. I had set up my small tent, and after a long day of archaeological work, I decided to step outside and stretch a bit. The stars were brighter than usual, hanging above like distant diamonds, and I was in awe of how isolated I felt in that moment. But then, something caught my eye. There was this light, a soft, bluish glow in the sky. At first I thought it was a plane or maybe a reflection of the stars off some nearby rock, but it wasn't. It wasn't moving like a plane. It was too alive. The light pulsed, brightening and dimming as it descended toward the ground. For a split second I thought it might be some kind of meteor or satellite. But the moment it started to get closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The air felt colder, and everything around me seemed to freeze. I felt like time was stretching, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The thing hovered above me, casting an unnatural glow that bathed the sand beneath my feet. I grabbed for my camera instinctively, but when I pressed the shutter, nothing happened. The camera malfunctioned completely. I tried again, same result. My heart started pounding in my chest, but it wasn't just the excitement or fear. It was something else, something deeper. Like my body knew something was wrong before my mind did. I stepped back, trying to rationalize what I was seeing, but then, without warning, the light flared brighter, and everything around me began to blur. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, and I felt as though the desert was pulling me up, like gravity itself was reversing. My feet left the sand, and in that instant I panicked. I reached out trying to grab anything, but there was nothing to hold on to. The world spun wildly, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being yanked upward. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The next thing I remember, I was no longer standing on the ground. I was inside something. It was cold, metallic, and the air felt strange, thick in a way that made it hard to breathe. My head was spinning, and I couldn't understand what had just happened. My eyes adjusted to the dim, bluish light surrounding me, and that's when I saw them. The beings. I didn't know what they were at first. Tall, slender figures with skin that shimmered a faint, unnatural blue. They stood around me, not making a sound, but I could feel their presence. Their eyes, these large, glowing orbs, fixed on me, and it was like they were staring into my very soul. I couldn't speak, I couldn't even move. They didn't speak aloud, not in the way we do, but I could feel their thoughts, like a whisper inside my mind, echoing in the silence. It wasn't words exactly, but it was communication. They were showing me images, holographic visions, I guess of distant planets, unfamiliar landscapes and structures that seemed impossible. I wanted to understand, but it was overwhelming. The images kept shifting too quickly, moving faster than I could process. They showed me things beyond comprehension. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my mouth wouldn't work, and my mind was too disoriented to form any real thoughts. Time in that place didn't make sense. 1 second, I was standing in front of these beings, and the next, I was being pushed, no, pulled again, back into the void. There was no warning, no sign, just an immense pressure, and then I found myself on the ground, hard and rough beneath me. I didn't know where I was, but it wasn't the same place I had been before. It was darker now, and I could see nothing familiar. The chill of the desert air hit me, but I could feel it differently. My body felt wrong, like I had been twisted or altered in some way. The panic returned, but there was also confusion. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to me. My head ached, and my chest tightened. I looked around, but nothing seemed right. I didn't recognize the terrain, and when I pulled out my compass, it was spinning wildly, the needle flicking in all directions like it was broken. I checked my watch, but the time was completely off. It wasn't just a little out of sync. Something was fundamentally wrong. My watch wouldn't work, and the compass wouldn't stop spinning. I felt trapped in some kind of nightmare, disoriented, unable to trust anything around me. How had I ended up so far from camp? I knew I had been near it when I saw the light, but now nothing looked familiar. And the most unsettling thing was the overwhelming silence. There were no sounds of animals, no wind, just the sound of my breath and the quick, panicked beat of my heart. I began to walk, desperate to find something, anything that might make sense of what had happened. But with every step, I felt further away from reality, like I was walking through a dream or a memory that wasn't my own. As I stumbled through the desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those beings, those strange blue figures standing there, observing me from the shadows. But there was nothing. Nothing except the eerie quiet and the sense that time itself had become warped. I walked for what felt like hours, but I couldn't tell if I was getting any closer to my camp. The moon had finally risen, casting a pale light over the sand, and even that felt wrong, like it was too bright for this time of night. But then I saw something. A figure, small and distant, off in the horizon. I thought it might be someone from the camp, a fellow explorer, so I pushed forward with whatever energy I had left. My body was exhausted, every step felt like it was dragging me deeper into some unseen pit, but I couldn't stop. The closer I got, the more I realized that it wasn't a person. It was a shadow, an outline, but not something alive. It was a shape that stood too still, too perfect in the midst of this vast, empty desert. I moved closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the closer I got, the stranger it became. The outline wasn't just a shadow, it was as though the landscape itself was warped around it. The ground seemed to ripple, as though there was some invisible force pulling at the earth beneath me. My heart started pounding again, my body on high alert. I stopped, trying to calm myself, trying to gather my thoughts, but everything felt like it was slipping away. The air felt thicker now, almost suffocating, and I could hear my own breath too clearly, too loudly. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to approach the shape, but I couldn't stop myself. Something about it was pulling me in, like it was calling me. I took another step, and that's when the ground beneath me shifted again, like it was moving, reacting to my presence. I froze. I felt it before I saw it. That same pull, that strange, unnatural force dragging me upward. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My mouth felt dry, my limbs heavy, and before I could even register what was happening, I was being lifted off the ground again. The stars blurred as I was pulled back into the air, and I could feel that crushing pressure on my chest once more. Panic surged through me as the landscape beneath me grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck. But this time, it wasn't the same as before. There was no cold metal around me, no blue beings, no strange flickering images. Instead, I found myself in complete darkness. Utter oppressive blackness that seemed to consume every sense I had. My mind screamed, but I couldn't make sense of anything. Where was I? What was happening? And then, just like that, I was back. My feet slammed onto solid ground, and the world around me snapped into place as though nothing had happened. The desert was still there, quiet and empty, with the stars above. I was back at my camp, only it wasn't the same place anymore. It felt distant, strange. I didn't know how I had gotten there or what had happened to me during those lost hours. My watch was still broken, the compass was still malfunctioning, but everything else seemed ordinary. I didn't understand. The equipment around me, the supplies, even the air felt different now. I was sweating, my clothes were soaked, and my body was shaking. I dropped to my knees, feeling nauseous, dizzy, like I had just woken up from the worst kind of nightmare. But there was no relief. There was no waking up from this. The confusion was overwhelming, like I had just crossed into a place I didn't belong. I checked my watch again, but it still didn't work. The compass spun wildly in my hands, the needle jerking back and forth without any sign of stopping. I felt a sharp, cold chill run through me as I realized something I hadn't before. The desert was no longer silent. I could hear something, faint, almost imperceptible at first. A hum, low and steady. It was coming from somewhere around me, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. It was as though the entire desert had come alive, vibrating with some unnatural energy. The sound grew louder, more oppressive, and I could feel it deep in my bones, rattling me to my core. My heart began to race again, and my mind was flooded with questions I couldn't answer. What had happened to me? Where had I been? I looked around the camp, searching for any sign that things were normal, but there was nothing. The shadows were longer, more distorted, like they were shifting, moving even when the wind wasn't blowing. I was too terrified to stay there. I grabbed my things as quickly as I could, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but I couldn't get the images out of my mind, the beings, the light, the silence. I had to leave. I knew something was wrong. Something had changed. Something deep, and I wasn't the same anymore. But as I made my way toward the edge of the camp, I stopped. There, just out of the corner of my eye, was a figure, a person, someone standing still, watching me. At first, I thought it was one of my colleagues, but when I turned to face them, they were gone, vanished, like they'd never been there. The hum in the air grew louder. I don't remember what happened next. When I came to, I was no longer standing. I was lying on the sand, my face buried in the dirt. I could taste the grit in my mouth, and my head was throbbing with a sharp, pulsing pain. My mind felt heavy, like a fog had settled in, and I had to fight to clear it. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented, struggling to stay upright. My body felt weak, like I hadn't slept in days, but somehow I knew it hadn't been days, just hours, or maybe minutes. Time had become such an enemy. I looked around again, and the landscape seemed to shift before my eyes. The desert was unchanged, but the air, it felt wrong, thicker, heavier. It was as if I had stepped into a different version of this place. The silence had returned, but now it wasn't just empty. It was oppressive, like something was watching, waiting. I tried to move, but my legs barely carried me. Every step felt like an eternity. The hum from earlier was still there, faint but constant, vibrating in the air. It was almost like a heartbeat, but wrong. It didn't belong in the desert. It didn't belong anywhere. I reached for my compass again, desperate to find some semblance of direction, but it was still spinning aimlessly in my hand, mocking me. The watch was useless too. Time no longer made sense, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I couldn't explain. I didn't know where I was or how I had gotten there. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and yet I felt like I was trapped, unable to escape. I couldn't even tell if it was still night. The stars above looked different now, as though they were out of place in the sky. It was as if I had somehow crossed over into a different reality. I thought about the beings. I thought about the light, the way it had pulled me into the air, and the strange holographic images they had shown me. I could still see them in my mind. Those blue-skinned figures with their glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through to my very core. They hadn't spoken a word, but their presence had been suffocating. The images they showed me, I could still feel them in the back of my mind like a distant memory I couldn't fully grasp. Planets I'd never seen, worlds I could never imagine. There was something beyond that light, beyond that encounter, but I couldn't bring myself to understand it. It felt like I wasn't meant to understand, and that terrified me. I knew I had to get out of there, but I wasn't sure where there even was anymore. The camp, the place I had come from, it all felt distant, like it didn't exist in the same reality I was now part of. I began walking again, but this time I felt more distant, more removed from my body. Every step felt like it was pulling me further away from myself. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. They were too chaotic, too fragmented. As I walked, I began to notice something strange in the sand. Footprints. Not mine. Someone else's. But they weren't fresh. They had been there for a long time, the edges worn away by the wind, barely visible. I followed them for what felt like miles, my steps growing heavier with every passing minute. The hum was louder now, almost deafening. I looked up, scanning the horizon, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The footprints led me to a strange outcrop of rocks, a jagged, unnatural formation that seemed to rise from the ground, like some kind of monument. It didn't belong there, not in this desert. It was too precise, too unnatural. I walked around, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I saw it. A symbol carved into the stone. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Circular, intricate, and strangely beautiful in its complexity. The moment my eyes locked onto it, I felt a coldness run through me, like it was alive. A feeling deep in my bones, telling me to stay away. But I couldn't. I reached out, my fingers grazing the surface of the stone. The moment I touched it, I was hit with a rush of images, faster than I could process. They were all the same. Worlds, planets, vast landscapes, all spinning around me, pulling me in. It was overwhelming. I jerked my hand away from the stone, breathing heavily, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just done something I wasn't supposed to do. Something that had opened something I wasn't meant to see. I backed, away from the symbol, stumbling over the rocks, my head spinning. I tried to focus on my surroundings, but the world felt distant, like I wasn't really there. It felt like I was in someone else's body, walking through a place I didn't belong. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I stood there, frozen, staring at the symbol carved into the rock. And then, just as quickly as it had all started, everything stopped. The hum, the strange energy, the weight of the air, it all just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The desert was silent again, but this time it felt different. The silence wasn't oppressive. It wasn't heavy. It was empty. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at the rocks, trying to make sense of what had happened. My mind was a tangled mess of confusion and fear, and the silence pressed in on me, making it harder to think. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain anything. The beings, the light, the symbols, the feeling of being pulled through space, none of it made sense. And yet, it felt so real. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see something different, something that might prove that I wasn't the same person anymore. But everything seemed normal. My skin was still the same, my fingers trembling from exhaustion. But I was me. Or at least, I thought I was. I finally started walking again, but it wasn't a decision I made. It was more like I was being moved forward by some invisible force. The camp wasn't far, but the closer I got, the more I realized that something had changed. I couldn't put it into words, but everything felt off. The air felt stale, like it had been trapped in time, and the landscape looked more alien, more wrong. The sand shifted under my boots like it was alive, and I could swear the stars above were watching me, moving in ways that weren't natural. I had the distinct impression that I wasn't supposed to be there, that I wasn't supposed to return. When I finally reached the camp, I was greeted by the most unsettling sight. Nothing had changed. The tent was still where I had left it, the fire pit cold and dark, and the rest of my gear untouched. But it felt like the entire place had been abandoned for years, not just hours. I stood there staring at the empty camp, wondering if I was even really there. I felt disconnected, like my body was still somewhere else, somewhere wrong. I checked my watch one more time, hoping that maybe it would work now, but the time on the screen was completely garbled. My compass was still spinning wildly, as though the world around me didn't have any direction. I sat down in front of the tent, my mind racing through everything that had happened. I had to be dreaming. I had to be hallucinating. There was no way any of this was real. But the fear was too intense, too visceral. It was real. I knew it was real. I could still feel the touch of those beings on my mind, their silent communication, the way they had forced those impossible images into my brain. It felt like something had changed inside me, like they had marked me somehow. As I sat there, I began to notice something even stranger. The sky, which had been clear earlier, was starting to look different. It was as if the stars were rearranging themselves. Not visibly, but in my mind, they were no longer distant pinpricks of light. They felt like they were close, too close. Almost like they were within my reach, pulling me in. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, but the feeling persisted. The hum was back too, but it was quieter this time, like it was coming from deep inside the earth, beneath the very sand I was sitting on. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I felt it. That's when I heard the voices, not from the air, not from anywhere outside of me, but in my head. They weren't words. They were feelings, emotions that flooded my mind in waves. Fear, confusion, pain. And then there was a flash of an image. Those same blue-skinned beings, their eyes glowing, staring at me from the dark. It was like they were communicating with me, telling me that I had seen too much, that I wasn't meant to remember. But I had. I was marked. And now I belonged to whatever it was that had brought me here. I didn't know how long I stayed there, frozen in place, my body trembling with fear I couldn't understand. The voices continued growing louder, and the images kept flashing in my mind, faster now, like they were trying to break through to force me to understand. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. My thoughts were spinning, and I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I looked around at the camp again, and something was different. The landscape had shifted. The horizon seemed farther away. The desert wasn't the same place I had left. It wasn't the same world. I stood up quickly, my legs shaking, but I didn't know where to go. It didn't matter. The place I had once known was no longer there, and the desert had swallowed me whole. The hum, the voices, the weight of it all was pressing down on me, suffocating me. And then, in a blink, it all stopped. The hum, the voices, the light, everything went silent again. It was as though nothing had happened at all. The desert stretched out in front of me, endless and empty. The stars above were just stars again, but they felt different. Distant, cold, unreachable. I could feel the weight of what had happened in my chest, heavy like a stone that refused to sink. I wanted to leave. I had to leave. But something in me held me there, rooted to the spot. It was like I couldn't move anymore. I tried to take a step forward, but it was like the ground was holding me in place. I looked back at the camp once more, and this time, there was nothing strange about it. It was just my old camp, the place I had set up days ago. But I felt empty, like I had forgotten something, or like something had forgotten me. My heart was racing. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't even tell you what was real anymore. And then, just like that, everything went black. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up later, in the exact same spot where I had been standing, with the camp still intact. Everything was normal. Too normal. I thought it had been a dream, some strange hallucination from the isolation, but I knew it wasn't. I could still feel it, feel them. They hadn't left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even now, years later. The strangest part is that I've never been able to explain those missing hours. The compass still spins wildly when I try to use it. The watch never works right. And sometimes when I'm alone, I can hear that faint hum in the air again. I don't know what happened to me in that desert. I don't know what I saw or what was shown to me. But something in me knows it wasn't just a dream, and I think it's still out there, waiting. I don't know if I'll ever understand what really happened that night. I don't know if I'll ever be the same again. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still with me, watching, waiting, and maybe I'll never be able to escape it. Maybe I wasn't meant to. Maybe none of us are. Third story, the green light in Chihuahua, Chihuahua Desert, Mexico, 1997. I don't know why I'm writing this down. Maybe it's because after all these years I still can't make sense of what happened to me, and writing it all out might somehow bring me some closure. I've tried to forget about it, but it keeps creeping back into my thoughts. It was 1997, and I was driving my truck down one of those endless stretches of road in the Chihuahua Desert. It's one of those isolated places where the silence hits you hard, where the only sound is the hum of your engine and the occasional gust of wind that kicks up the dry dirt. I'd been on the road for hours, my mind dull from the monotony, and then out of nowhere, it happened. My truck just stopped. No warning, no sputtering, just complete silence. I tried the ignition a few times, but nothing, and that's when I saw it. I wasn't sure what it was at first. A glow, a faint green light in the distance, but it wasn't like any headlights I'd seen before. It wasn't even like anything I'd seen in the sky. The light was too close, too bright, and it was coming straight at me. I should have been scared, I should have panicked, but for some reason, I couldn't move. It was like my body refused to react. I tried to step on the gas, tried to reach for the gear shift, but my hands, they were frozen. It's hard to explain. It wasn't like I was paralyzed. It was more like something was controlling my mind, making it impossible for me to make any decisions on my own. The light surrounded my truck, and that's when I felt it. A pressure, like something heavy pressing down on me, on my chest, on my head. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think straight. I heard this buzzing sound like 1,000 bees right in my ears, except it wasn't loud, it was inside my head. I couldn't get away from it. And then I wasn't in the truck anymore. I don't know how it happened. I didn't black out or anything, but 1 second I was sitting there helpless, and the next, I was in this place. I don't even know how to describe it. It was a room, I guess, but not like anything I'd ever seen before. The walls were smooth, metallic, but they didn't reflect anything, like they were absorbing the light around me. And the floor, it was shiny, like it was made of glass, but it felt soft under my feet. I could barely keep my balance. I don't know how long I was there, but it felt like an eternity. And then they came in, the beings. They weren't human. I don't know how to explain it better than that. They were tall, unnaturally thin, with skin that was a dull grayish color. Their heads were huge, their eyes, God, their eyes, were the size of my fists, pitch black, with no whites. They didn't blink. I don't even know how they communicated, but I could feel them in my head. There were no words, but I understood them. I felt everything they wanted me to feel. It was like they were inside me, controlling my thoughts. I couldn't even scream. I don't know how long they examined me, but it felt like hours. They didn't touch me at first. It was like they were just observing, studying. One of them got close to my face and I could feel its breath, if you can call it that. It was cold, like a gust of wind, but it didn't have the texture of air. It was wrong. And then, just as quickly, it moved away. I could hear a strange humming sound, like machinery working in the background. But it wasn't anything mechanical I'd ever heard before. The lights above me flickered and I felt a sharp pain shoot through my skull, like something was digging into my brain. That's when it happened. Flashes, symbols. They weren't words, not like any language I'd ever seen. They were shapes, strange geometrical things that twisted and morphed in my mind's eye. They felt familiar, but at the same time they were so foreign that my mind couldn't make sense of them. My head throbbed, and the pain became unbearable. My hands went numb, and I could feel my legs shaking beneath me. I don't know if I was standing, sitting, or floating at that point. The next thing I remember is a strange tingling in my hands and feet, like 100 tiny needles poking into my skin all at once. The pressure in my head was unbearable, but then it started to fade. The symbols were gone, but the feeling of their presence, the feeling of being watched, stayed with me. It's like they left something inside me, something I couldn't shake. I don't know how or why, but it seemed like the beings were satisfied with whatever they were doing. Suddenly, the room, or whatever it was, seemed to distort. Like everything was warping around me. The air got thick, and the buzzing in my ears grew louder again. I was shoved back into my truck. I don't know how they did it. One second I was in that strange, cold room, and the next I was sitting in the driver's seat again. The engine roared to life on its own like nothing had happened, but something had changed. I felt different, disoriented, weak, like I'd been drained of something. I don't remember how long I sat there just staring at the steering wheel. I don't know if it was minutes or hours, but it felt like I couldn't move. I felt like my brain was scrambled, and it took everything I had just to get out of that daze. When I finally snapped out of it, I started driving again. It was like my body just went into autopilot, steering me down that empty stretch of desert. But I wasn't right. I could feel the pain in my head, like a constant pressure on my skull, and my arms. My arms felt like they were on fire. I looked down at them, and that's when I saw it, the red marks. These blotchy, dark red marks all over my forearms. They weren't bruises. They were like scars, almost like something had burned me. I rubbed at them, but the pain didn't go away. My head felt heavy, like there was something stuck inside. My mind, like something was still there, pulling at the edges of my thoughts. I tried to shake it off, but the more I thought about it, the worse it got. It was like they were still in my head, and I couldn't get rid of them. At some point, I don't even know when, I realized I wasn't alone on the road anymore. A truck had pulled up beside me, honking its horn to get my attention. It was another driver, a fellow trucker who had probably noticed how erratic I was, driving. He looked concerned, and I don't blame him. If he'd seen me, he probably would have been worried too. I don't remember much of the conversation, or even if there was one. All I remember is that I was not myself. I was shaking, my heart racing, and I couldn't form a coherent sentence. I just stared at him, trying to understand what had happened. I told him I was fine. Somehow I managed to say that, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. He kept asking if I needed help, if I was okay, but all I could do was nod. I wasn't okay. I don't know how long I stayed there. With him on the side of the road, I think I was probably in shock. Eventually, he left me alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wasn't sure if I was still hallucinating or if it was real, but there was this strange pressure in the air. It was like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I wasn't supposed to be on that road. My vision was blurry, and the world around me seemed to warp in strange ways. Everything was too bright, and then too dark. I could still feel that buzzing like the static before a radio signal, only it was inside my skull, making me dizzy. I should have pulled over and rested, but I just kept going. I couldn't stop. I had to get out of there. Hours later, or what felt like hours, I came across another trucker. He was parked by the side of the road, looking around nervously. I don't know what he saw in me, but he seemed just as scared as I was. He asked me if I needed help, but I couldn't say anything. I was barely able to speak. My words came out slurred and uneven. I felt so wrong. He must have seen the marks on my arms, the way I was clutching my head, because he didn't argue when I said I just needed to go home. He offered to escort me, but I couldn't let him. I didn't want to bring anyone else into whatever the hell was happening to me. He eventually drove off, and I kept moving forward. My head felt like it was going to explode from the pressure. The symbols were still in the back of my mind, flashing in and out. That's when I realized I don't think I've ever been alone since that night. There's always something there. Always. When I finally made it to a truck stop, I was beyond exhausted. My head was pounding, and every step felt like I was wading through some invisible fog. I pulled over and staggered out of the truck, my legs barely holding me up. The people at the stop, they probably thought I was just another worn-out driver, but I felt like I wasn't me anymore. I felt like something had changed inside me, like I had been touched by something that was never meant to be touched. I went into the diner to grab a coffee, hoping it would clear my head, but it didn't. It only made it worse. My vision kept blurring, and the people around me seemed off. The whole place felt wrong. Every sound was too loud, every movement too sudden. And the worst part, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching me. I felt like I was being observed, even though I couldn't see anyone there. I could feel it, though. The weight of it was suffocating. I tried to talk to the waitress, tried to ask for some kind of help, but the words wouldn't come out right. They came out garbled, like I was speaking in a foreign language. She looked at me strangely, her eyes flicking from me to the door, as if she was worried I was going to do something. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I was sweating, even though the temperature was low. I had to leave. I didn't know why, but I had to get out of there. I stumbled back to my truck, feeling the same strange sense of urgency. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew I couldn't stay in that place any longer. I drove away in a daze, not sure where I was going or what I was doing. Just needed to get away. It wasn't until much later that I realized something had been wrong with me all along. I couldn't remember everything, but pieces of it started coming back in flashes. Those damn symbols, they haunted me. I'd try to sleep, but my dreams were full of them, shifting, twisting shapes like they were carved into my skull. I couldn't escape them. I tried going to a doctor, thinking maybe I had just gone insane from the exhaustion, but the doctor's tests came back normal. Nothing. No answers. It wasn't just the physical marks on my arms, the pain in my head, or the odd sensation of being watched. Something inside me had been changed. I could feel it. It was like there was a part of me, a part that had been taken away, and I didn't know how to get it back. Over the next few days, I tried to get back to my normal routine, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those damn creatures. They weren't human. I know that now. They weren't anything I could ever explain. I don't know if I'll ever be able to. But it wasn't just the memories. It was what they left behind in my mind. Every time I looked at something, anything, those symbols flashed in front of my eyes, and I'd feel that cold pressure in my chest. I knew it wasn't just in my head. It was like something had been planted there, something that couldn't be undone. I don't know if it was their doing or if it was just me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was changed. I could see things that weren't there, hear sounds that didn't exist. It wasn't like hallucinations, but it was something. I felt like I was slipping into a version of reality that wasn't mine. I tried to tell people about what happened, but I couldn't make them understand. No one believed me. How could they? I didn't believe it myself when it first started. But the pain, the flashes of those symbols, the feeling that I wasn't alone, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went back to the desert a few times, thinking maybe I could find some sort of answer, some sign that what had happened to me wasn't just some terrible fever dream. But every time I went back, it felt like the desert was just as empty as before, like it was waiting for me to leave, to get away, as if something else was out there, watching, waiting for me to come back. I haven't gone back to that place since. I can't. I don't know why, but it feels like if I do, I'll never come back. I still don't know what happened that night. I can't explain it. Maybe I was abducted. Maybe I was just driven mad by the isolation, by the desert, by something I couldn't understand. But the marks on my arms are still there, and the symbols are still in my mind. And every time I look up at the night sky, I feel that same pressure on my chest. I don't know if it'll ever stop. Maybe I'll never get rid of it. Maybe I don't even want to, because when I think about it, there's a part of me that knows they'll come back, and I'm not sure if I'll be ready. I don't think I'll ever be ready.